You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 148. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
I see churches and pastors do this all the time. Put so much hope into a new idea. That new idea might not work at all. That's like such a silly thing to do. Our hope has to be in something that's eternal.
Today we're having a conversation with Joe Graves. Joe is one of the pastors at Central City Church, a new church start that just celebrated its 3rd birthday. We have a conversation about Joe's top 5 strengths, centering in on his Activator strength, but part of what you'll experience in this conversation is also Joe's Ideation strength and his Intellection strength, with a tad bit of command thrown in. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast. To go directly to this episode, go to transformingmission.org/148. Without any further wait, here's our conversation with Joe Graves.
Joe, welcome to LeaderCast. We want to begin just with a couple of simple questions. Just the first one is, who are you and what do you get paid to do?
Well, I'm Joe Graves, pastor in West Ohio, serving at Central City Church along with Alyssa Graves. And I think there's a lot of ways to answer what do you get paid to do, but I think, and I don't want to over spiritualize it, but I do think I get paid to pray. I think so much of what I do, and I think what we do as pastors is to try to listen to God and then obey. It's like there's no other way, as the old song goes. But at the heart of that's just prayer. What does it mean to be attuned to what the Spirit's saying for myself and for our community, and to create ways to act on that?
This is a question we ask everyone. What does being a disciple of Jesus mean to you?
Yeah, and I'm sure you typically get the same, similar answer. So it's hard to, which is good. Yeah.
Well, I gave you a clue in the question.
Yeah. It's hard to be a follower of Jesus without talking about Jesus. But yeah, being a follower, disciple, student, I think caring about the things that Jesus cares about. So for me, we have to find simple ways to summarize that. And I think for me, it has to do with things like choosing to have a relationship with God by investing in that relationship through prayer and other spiritual disciplines, and then engaging in loving people, both on a more intimate level in regards to people that I know and I'm close with, and then on a more holistic level in regards to justice. So being a disciple of Jesus comes down to those 2 commandments for me: love God and love others.
So part of what we do as we talk about discipleship is also about how we're put together. God's gifted us in certain ways, and we talk about that through Clifton strengths. What are your top 5 strengths?
Yeah, my top 5 strengths are Activator, Command, Futuristic, Ideation, and Intellection. I think that's 5.
So for the sake of our conversation, we're going to separate out that Activator talent theme for just a moment, and let me remind our listeners what that talent theme is all about. Gallup says that people exceptionally talented in the Activator theme can make things happen by turning thoughts into actions. They want to do things now rather than simply talk about them. Now, I say that, and we put that in the context of, Joe, your other 4 strengths that you lead with in terms of command, futuristic, ideation, and an election. And so those may come into our conversation as well. But part of what Gallup put together in terms of leadership around these strengths is that there are 4 needs of followers, that the people that we are leading have 4 basic things that they need from us. They need us to build trust, they need us to show compassion, they need us to provide stability, and they need us to offer hope. And the beautiful thing that happens is because our top 5 strengths are all different, each one of us do that in unique ways. So as you think about your Activator talent theme, let's explore these 4 needs of followers and start with building trust. So Activator is all about action. And you said that you're co-leading a church with your wife, Alyssa. How do you make sure that you don't promote or act on your own ideas so that you can build trust, respect, and be the leader that God created you to be? And before we hit the record button, I'm thinking that you might answer this with one of your other top 5 talents. So how do you do that?
I think it's a great question. One of the things about Activator is you can put thoughts into action. And I find that is something that frustrates a lot of people if they don't. There's a lot of people who have great ideas and they don't know how to make it happen. And so there is a sense that if you have this strength, that you can be perceived as impressive. Because there's nothing more impressive in our world that values action, that values accomplishment, than being able to accomplish things because you had the idea. And that, I think, frustrates people. So I've had to learn to recognize that there's a certain kind of privilege and public persona coming from somebody who can get things done, and to really wrestle with what it means to give people credit. So, one of the things that I'm really learning just like right now is that when you're in a position like me, where you're a pastor of a church, when you're a co-pastor, when you're married, when you're working with other people, is if you don't give credit, you're essentially taking it. And I've never had that perspective. I'm more of a person that does view different strengths, and where people, everyone has something to offer, and it's not really about getting credit. So then I've always assumed it was okay just not to give it. But the reality is, when you're in a position like myself, I tend to be upfront, and the pastor that tends to be upfront more. If you're not giving credit, you are essentially taking it. Even if you're not taking credit, it's being given to you by default. And so that's something that I've just now this year kind of wrestling with and thinking through. So the way that I try to do it, though, generally speaking, is to use some of my other strengths. And one of my strengths that's involved in the beginning of any major decision in the life of the church is ideation. And I love ideas, and I love hearing other people's ideas and bouncing them off. So I think of myself as collaborative, but as somebody who's collaborative with the command strength. So I can usually control the conversation. So, it's somewhat hypocritical to say that I'm collaborative, but I do really like ideas. So one of the ways I do it is I don't actually like acting on every idea. I'm too tired for that now, maybe when I was younger. So I want to narrow ideas down. And so that
okay, Joe, wait just a moment, because folks that are listening to you can't see you, and maybe not everyone that listens is going to know you. If I may ask you, what decade of life are you in?
Oh, mid 30s.
Okay, but, just so our listeners have some perspective.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I've been in full-time ministry for 10 years. And 4 of those years we were planning a church. So that counts at least as double. Using my strengths since I was in high school. So, and that's like, 2003 or whatever. So, it feels like 20 years at this point. It's not, but it feels like that. So I don't know. I am tired though. So older than I am, but it is exhausting work. So, and I think I've learned enough to say maybe there's a time where I'd act on the first idea, but I'm just not interested in that anymore. They mean too much. The ramifications of implementing, putting into action words, using your activator strength to make something happen, you're stuck with it then. And people become comfortable with it, and then changing that becomes difficult. So I do taper that by having lots of conversation, bouncing a lot of ideas around, and trying to create collaboration with other people.
Yeah, and please hear me, Joe. I'm not discounting the tiredness that you're experiencing or dismissing that in any way, shape, or form, especially in this season. I simply wanted folks to have a little perspective on what decade of life you are in. And you didn't mention this, but I'll name it for you. You also have a young child.
Oh yeah.
And so there's another element that's happening there. Tim, do you want to take us to the showing compassion aspect of leadership?
I do, but I want to say, Joe, what you've just said to me, what I've just heard, is that you actually are learning. So regardless of the years that you've been there, your experience is bringing you to a point to be able to adapt differently. And I appreciate that. Which leads us to this next question. You're making decisions, you're listening, you're collaborating. So what actions on behalf of others have you taken recently, and you can actually define what recently is, to show you care?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The number one issue that is impacting people's lives is the coronavirus. And, I have to say, in our community, we've been a community that's dealt with a variety of controversial issues, and we list a controversial theological issue, and we've had conversation around it, and people are attracted to that about us. But I will say, I've never felt more divided over an issue than coronavirus in our community. And one of the things that I find myself engaging an immense amount of energy and taking action on is trying to hold in tension the various perspectives from individuals who are maybe isolating more than others versus those who want life to go back to normal. And as a church, those decisions impact us in big ways. As I listen to various ideas of people who really care about whether they meet in person or don't, whether they think that's, what's best for the church. So I don't know what actions I'm taking other than trying to find that balance and trying to listen and be compassionate and find the best nuanced way to meet everyone's needs and to still do what we believe is right in an area that people are divided and really impacts people's lives. Whether we meet in person or meet outside or just do live stream or offer it in person. These are really complicated issues. And my heart just really, I share that as an example because that's probably where I have the most compassion right now, is thinking about people in our community who are living their lives very differently because of the coronavirus. And my heart goes out to all of them and trying to figure out how to be a pastor to these various groups that have really tangible differences, where some people I'm meeting face to face and others I'm not, et cetera. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's probably the biggest place where my heart is kind of broken and trying to care for people.
Well, what we know from the Gallup study is that followers look for compassion from their leaders. And so it sounds like to me that in a time that's very difficult and crisis-ridden, as you've said in a different way, you've got to come alongside people to care for them in ways that you might not be doing it otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, because caring for some people means meeting with them face-to-face and doing that in a safe way. And caring for others is trying to think of creative ways to provide church for them in their home. And it's tricky. It's a tricky season to be a pastor, as everyone says, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me listening to you through the lens of an activator strength, that some of the things that may come into play in other seasons of life just aren't going to happen right now because of the complexity that you have named. And so shifting just a bit to the third aspect of what people need from their leaders, and that's providing stability. It sounds like you're having to have courage as a leader to step into some difficult conversations, some difficult decisions. So how is courage a part of the stability that you're offering to people?
I don't know, if I'm courageous. Maybe if courage is defined as doing the right thing even when it's terrifying, or doing the right thing after spending enough time thinking about it so that it's no longer terrifying, then maybe courage is something I have to offer. But I think stability is something that I haven't always excelled at during this season. I've had to do my own work internally processing with the change in the world and the impact of social isolation, but getting past my own disconnect and struggles early on in the pandemic, it really comes down to trying to offer people perspective and vulnerability. And those are the things that it seems to have the biggest impact on people's lives across the board. And so perspective being just helping people see that this is a blip in the history of the world, and that, this isn't the first time there's been a pandemic and it's the first time, just creating some perspective that people can recognize they're a part of something bigger than their immediate struggles, and that there really isn't anything new under the sun, and reframing stuff. And then also vulnerability. I think there's a sense where you can we lean on that a lot at our church, where we are just, I think, brutally, but also we try to be appropriately vulnerable so that people can connect and be able to own in their own life their fears and their struggles. And so there's plenty of things to be vulnerable during this time. Being able to share that with other people, and we can connect around our similar fears. I think that's the stuff of community, and the community is at the heartbeat of stability. We move together forward, accomplishing whatever task, because we feel like we know each other. I think for me, the two things that create stability is, I think community in general is how we remain stable. So we know people, and we feel like we are known, and that we have something in common, that we're experiencing something together. So having perspective, being able to reframe the story is really important. And then vulnerability from the top down in appropriate and often brutal ways. And that's what I'm trying to do as I wrestle with all of the complications of the world and the crisis, and just being honest with people. And then they can connect with that. And I think community is built around that. They feel like, I think people are willing to move forward when they feel like they're doing it with someone that they know and trust, and that they feel like they're known and trusted.
And cared for, and and they've got some solid ground to stand on. And
yeah, and Joe, you started by saying, I don't know that I'm courageous. And let me just say to you, in the research that Brene Brown has done around courageous leadership for the past now 11 years, part of what she uncovered is that the number one skill that needs to be in place for courage to be present in leaders is rumbling with vulnerability. And you've just named that. And so if that's happening, yes, there is likely going to be courage that is going to follow. And as you've said, not just vulnerability for vulnerability's sake, inappropriate ways that invite folks to step out. And I would say it this way, to step out in faith and trust that God is leading you to a new place. And I think that leads us to the fourth thing that followers need from their leaders.
They need hope. So as you think about hope, where or how has the phrase, "you never know until you try," helped you offer hope in this season? Or has it?
I'll be honest with you, that's not a phrase I've used. And this might be me talking as a church planner. We live in a church plant that from the very beginning has an immense amount of flexibility. There's not really too many people saying we've always done it that way in our context, because we've never done it that way. It's brand new. So the whole idea that we'll never know until you try. Well, that's kind of an assumption, I think, in our community. Now, coronavirus made it even more so. Before coronavirus, we were still operating around with a somewhat perspective of I think generally speaking, within realms of accepted norm, hey, anything's possible. Let's think outside the box. Everything's new. We're here because we want to do things differently. That's literally what the landing page on our website says, is we're doing church differently. So there's an assumption that happens around trying new things. But then coronavirus happens, and it goes to a whole nother level where it's okay, now we can really just try whatever. So the phrase that I actually use now is there are no rules. There's no rules for this season. So we can have the freedom to try all kinds of things. I think it comes down to really being careful how you try stuff, because with any new idea, and this comes back to the activator strength of having started a lot of things, I will say that I've started way more things than I've finished, right? That's just part of the activator personality. So I know what it feels like to start something and for it to fizzle out. And I think that's actually, I've experienced that so much that's something that I've learned from the activator strength probably than the idea of even starting something, is the pain, the disappointment, the confusion of watching something slowly die or watching something not become a thing. So part of the strength of you never know until you try is actually the process. What is the process we're employing to try something? So what is the end date? How long are we going to do this before we assess it? Is this a one-time thing? We're going to then debrief it. We're going to do this for 3 weeks and then debrief it? Having that conversation up front is, I think, extremely helpful. I'm not interested in just like, let's try anything and see what happens. I'm much more interested in having a process, because as somebody, like I said, who's watched a lot of things start and then die or fizzle out, that's a painful thing. Like, nobody wants to live through that. And I've lived through it a lot in very small ways because I've started way too many things in my life. So I think it's just coming back to that process of like, what does it mean to try something out? And what does it mean to effectively debrief it and to think through it? So and I think in our community, people are on board for that.
Yeah. So have exemplified courageous leadership again, from my perspective.
Yeah,
well, I mean, you've moved from a place where you've got the idea, because this is one of your strengths, ideation and activator. So you're going to move the idea to action, and then all of a sudden it fizzles out. And so you've begun to learn. And in the midst of that learning, you now have more of an opportunity to be courageous in saying, it's a good idea, but maybe it's not its time.
Yeah.
Or you're making a decision about what needs to happen before we move it into action. Sarah knows much more about that than I do, and I'm not asking her to bail me out on it. It's just that that's what I'm hearing when I hear you talk about that. And I think it's decisions like you've just said, talking about it up front, that actually brings hope for people, because it's not wishful thinking. It's actually, we're going to bring this to reality. And what do we need to do to bring this to reality? The wishful thinking piece is, we just tried it and it didn't work. I hoped it would work, but it didn't. You're putting everything in place to make it work. That's part of the agency of bringing about hope.
Well, and as an activator and an ideation person, I think it's extremely dangerous and foolish to put your hope into a new idea. And I see churches and pastors do this all the time. Put so much hope into a new idea. That new idea might not work at all. That's like such a silly thing to do. Our hope has to be in something that's eternal. It has to be in the person of Christ, or the historic church, or the spiritual, like there has to be like, when we're casting hope in the community, we have to believe in something that is bigger than ourselves. Now, one of the ways we'll try to live that out is this new idea, but we don't know if it's going to work out. And here's how we're going to try and experience that. And we're going to do it for a season. And so I really do think when it comes down to the conversation of hope, we have to ask ourselves, we can't put hope into new ideas. I see it happen way too many times, and it's unhealthy, and it can cause an immense amount of damage. Because if that new idea doesn't work out, which, as somebody who has some pretty good ideas, they don't work out, you've just not only ruined people's hope, but they're less likely to hope in the future again, because, they tried it once and it didn't work. That, their hope has been tied up into something that's destructible. I think the other thing for me is I really want people to enjoy themselves, and enjoy, or just having fun, is a big part of it. And if joy isn't possible, then I at least want it to be meaningful. So maybe one of the other, powerful emotions, I just want it to be meaningful or joyful. And a lot of joy comes down to managing expectations. So trying new things is great, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done around casting hope and painting a picture of the future while managing expectations around the cost and, the risks that are involved. So.
You may have just done this, but is there anything else that you want to share about how your top 5 are fueling your leadership in this season?
I'll answer it in the negative. One of my primary strengths in the past has been futuristic, kind of figuring out what's going to be up ahead and working towards it. And I will say that in this season, there are so many unknown variables that's the one that probably is the least useful for me. I've had to put it on the sidelines almost, because nobody knows what the future is going to hold on to. So all the other ones I've had to lean into: ideation, intellection, command, activator, coming up with ideas. I spend an immense amount of time around intellection, wrestling with all of the conundrums of ministry an immense amount. And if I don't have time to really process it all, I'm not only maybe not as good of a leader, I go a little crazy. But then, trying to use my command to create some of that stability, honestly, comes from probably my command strength and being able to, and then it's not my top 5, but communication is probably up there. And I really value effective communication, one-on-one in groups and in writing. I think right now, with so much uncertainty, people need to know very clearly what's going on, why we're doing it, why it matters, et cetera. So
what do you celebrate God doing in your life or your leadership in the past 3 months?
Oh, I think it's fair and appropriate to say that God is sustaining us, and that is worth celebrating in 2020. There's a lot of things that have gone well. We've had some really fun experiences. Alyssa did a fantastic job organizing our 3-year anniversary, and it was outside and people came and they socially distanced and we made sure it was fun. And I was like, that was a celebration of all that God has done in our community. And we spent time sharing that. But, even besides those things and just being able to worship outside with people, which was a lifesaver for my soul, live stream is not fun for me. So those are some things that I really, really appreciate God pulling together. But just in general, I think our church is still doing stuff in the community. It's still around. I'm still a pastor. And so I celebrate just that God sustaining us so far. And we pray into the future.
So, Joe, shifting just a little bit, what characteristics of other leaders fuel your courage? Or said a different way, what characteristics of other leaders make a good partner in leadership for you?
My struggle is that, one, I have a lot of ideas. And 2, because of intellection, I overthink them and spend a lot of time wrestling and thinking and even sometimes talking with people. And then with Activator, I've got a history of starting things that don't pan out and fizzle out or just quite honestly fail. And so there's fear of failure. There's an immense amount of ideas and then overthinking. One of the things that Alyssa does as co-pastor that's really helpful is, sometimes the answer doesn't require a lot of ideas, a lot of thinking, and it's really obvious. Actually, that's often the case. And she kind of is able to see through. I get lost in the woods. So one of the things that's really helpful, specifically with Alyssa, but I think in other settings as well, as I kind of I reach out to people I work with, our staff, and I'm like, here's all the different things going on. What do you think? And people will be like, well, let's do this. And I'm like, you're right. I just needed somebody to remove the options and make a really simple case for an obvious answer. And so that's one of the characteristics that other leaders make a good partner with me is being able to cut through all the cloud and confusion and bring some clarity because I get lost.
Are you ready for our rapid fire round?
Whew, I'm very nervous. You're going to see my subconscious.
No, these are fun off-the-cuff questions
But no R-rated answers, I assume.
No, that our hope is that the folks who listen will get to know you a little bit better and also maybe laugh a little bit along the way. It goes back to that joy and having fun piece. So this is the fun part of the podcast.
I like my joys very carefully processed ahead of time.
The amount of anxiety that has been expressed as we have talked with folks when we get to this section because they don't see the questions has been kind of funny. And you'll see why here as Tim gets us started with these.
That's great.
What's your morning beverage of choice?
Coffee. Black. No cream or sugar.
What is your favorite or go-to Bible verse?
I believe, help my unbelief.
What's your favorite season and why?
Fall, because I hate hot weather and cold weather is not great either, but fall's beautiful.
When did you get your first Bible?
Oh, geez, probably from my parents. I don't know. When I was very young, son of a pastor.
What do people misunderstand about you?
That I'm not very confident. I think I come across as fairly confident. I actually question myself all the time.
This will be a fun one for you, I think. What is the last thing that you read?
Oh, I read a science fiction novel called Ancillary Justice.
Ooh.
It was great.
Your favorite part of Thanksgiving dinner?
The nap afterwards.
What is your least favorite household chore?
Cleaning the bathrooms.
When was the last time you laughed?
Earlier in this conversation.
What is your favorite vacation spot or place to relax?
A beach somewhere. Mexico, Puerto Rico. Those are the places we've been.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for joining us for LeaderCast and sharing with us a little glimpse into your world as a pastor and as a leader in this crazy time that we are living in. Is there any last word that you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, just grateful for the time to talk and appreciate what you all do.
Tim, any last minute words?
Joe, you've been a gift to me today. I appreciate what you do and how you do it. I mean, there are very few people, pastors, who can start churches. Mm. And you've been able to do that in partnership with your wife, who is also the pastor. And you even expressed to us today how she balances out some of the pieces of your strengths and how she brings her strengths together. So I'm grateful for that. That will be good for the people who listen. And so thanks. It's good to see you.
So here are my 2 questions for you today after listening to this episode. First question is this: what ideas are you contemplating? And here's what I want you to do. Go ahead and make a list of those ideas and then decide which one you're going to put into action. Now, here's what I want you to think about. Put a time frame on that. Is it going to be by the end of this week? Is it the end of this month? Or perhaps it's the end of the year. Only you know the realistic time frame on making this decision. What I don't want you to do is continue to ponder the ideas and never take action. Which leads me to my second question for you. Who cuts through the noise of decision making for you? So after you've listed out your ideas and you've decided on your time frame, have a conversation with that person that you've just identified. Helps you to cut through the noise of decision making for you so that you can begin to take action. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast. On the podcast page, you'll also see Joe's top 5 with the definitions of each of his talent themes, along with the questions that we've talked about today, and much, much more. Head over to the show notes page at transformingmission.org/podcast. Now go lead a movement of Jesus followers. Bye for now.